Hello everybody, this is my video on conversation fillers, or we might call this video how can you maintain fluency when you're thinking about what to say next, or when you don't have anything to say. So we're going to look at three things. We will look at the definition very quickly, the definition of a conversation filler. We will look at the purpose, and then we will spend most of the time looking at how to use some of these words. Okay, so let's get started and look at the definition. Okay, so a filler word or a conversation filler is a word that has little or no meaning. It just indicates a pause, a hesitation in speech. It shows the intention to continue speaking. And these are among the most common words in English. So words like like, okay, right, you know. So we use these words all the time, you know. They're very, very common in natural speech. So if somebody told you to avoid these words, it's not useful advice. We use the words all the time. Even great speakers like Barack Obama, they use these types of words in their speeches. They're very, very natural. It's natural speech. Okay, so what's the purpose of conversation fillers? Well, number one, they maintain fluency, so they allow me to continue speaking when I don't have anything to say. Two, they limit the dead space, the dead airtime, or the long pause. So the long pause is very uncomfortable. It's very awkward for the listener. So I will show you some examples of this later, but you really want to avoid long pauses, and then people don't know if you're going to continue speaking or if you stopped speaking, if you have something to say or not. Maybe they start feeling nervous for you because you don't have anything to say. So conversation filler is really great just for giving yourself a little bit of time. So really these are all closely related things, giving yourself time and developing that longer speaking turn. So they're really not four different things here. They're all really the same thing, seen in a slightly different way. So that's the purpose. Now let's move on and look at some examples of conversation fillers, how they function, and then how we use them in some sentences to make our speaking more fluent. Okay, so here are some of the most common conversation fillers, and they are among the most common words in English. Well is used so often. If you need time to think, you can say, well, let me think. Actually, the main thing I want to say is, so you create some time there. You see, it's very, very natural. When you're thinking about what you want to say, we use this kind of language. Well, it's like, well, basically what I mean is, resilience is a question of dealing with stress, processing stress. That's what I mean by resilience. You see, when somebody's resilient, it means, right, you get the point. So you shouldn't plan to use these. You shouldn't go into the speaking test and say, well, so anyway, basically it's like, you see, thank you very much. You shouldn't be planning them. but you should be filling in the dead time, filling in the dead space. So when you need to think a little bit about what you want to say, instead of just stopping, you use the conversation filler. So I'll give you two examples. One where the person speaks and pauses, and the second where they use conversation fillers. And hopefully you can see that number two is better and more fluent than number one. So student number one begins and says, I think resilience is very important because it enables us to deal with stress. Dealing with stress is very important in life because our lives are very stressful. An example of this is my studies at the moment. I have 3 exams next week and I have to prepare a lot. I have to study a lot for those exams. And that's why resilience is important. Right, so I can't remember exactly. I'm not going to say exactly the same thing the second time. I will say something similar with conversation fillers. Well, the reason why resilience is important is that it enables you to process stress. So by that, I mean that our lives can be very, very stressful. You know, recently I've been taking my exams and I have 3 exams next week and I have to study very hard. And basically, to be honest with you, my life is quite stressful. And well, basically, that's why I think that studying resilience is very important in our lives. It enables us to deal with and to process the stress. It's probably better not to pause too long and not to use too many conversation fillers. Maybe I used a few too many that time, but you get the point. The second speech sounded more fluent and was easier to listen to than the first. Okay, so it's a basic strategy for maintaining fluency, for dealing with fluency. So let's just look at a few more. In a previous video, I said don't self-correct. So let's say that you say a sentence and you don't like the sentence. Instead of self-correcting, you just go back and you clarify what you said. So let me give an example. So let's say you say something you think is unclear, like resilience is the capacity to process anxiety. And you think that's not very good. So you say, what I mean to say is that we deal with stress by processing it, and that is resilience. So if you think of a clearer way of communicating, it's fine to say it again. Don't go back and self-correct. Use this kind of filler, this kind of language, and just clarify the meaning. Oh, what I wanted to say, perhaps I could make it clearer by saying, my point being, this is a useful one. The point is, the point being, then you can really focus on the main point that you want to make. So again, another example. So the first part will be unclear. I think that resilience is important because stress processing. Sorry, what I mean is it enables us to process stress. The thing is, our lives are very stressful, and resilience is the way we deal with that stress. So I started out communicating unsuccessfully, and then my communication became clearer. I clarified what I wanted to say, and I made it clear to the listener that was what I was doing by using this specific language, like I mean, or what I want to say is, but I didn't lose fluency. I kept speaking, I maintained fluency, and it was much more effective communication. Of course, you're going to make some mistakes, so don't self-correct, but do clarify. Clarification is very good, okay, because it shows that you want to communicate clearly to the listener. Okay, so it's quite sincere as well. The other thing that's very useful, of course, when we speak, sometimes we get off the topic, we get off the subject. So to refocus, to return to the main point, we looked at one before, which was my point being, but you can also, of course, say things like, as I mentioned before, as I was saying previously, as I was saying just a moment ago. These things, of course, are very, very natural and should be used to make your speech more coherent. So hopefully I gave you some idea of why conversation fillers are important. We looked at the definition of conversation fillers, the purpose, and we looked at some examples. I'm not suggesting that you plan and prepare these, but when we do the live conversation, I think these will be very, very useful. So let's practice trying to develop longer turns when we speak. And if we can't think of something to say, then this language is really, really useful. Okay, thanks very much, everybody.